Japanese RPGs are a constant in video games today. It's a well-established formula of a group of heroes rising from nothing and quickly escalating to saving the world and fighting God along the way. But 30 years ago, JRPGs were still figuring out what worked and what didn't. Many staples of the genre today were still in their early entries, while today we eagerly await Final Fantasy XVI. In 1994, fans had just received the legendary Final Fantasy VI. Dragon Quest was flourishing in Japan with Dragon Quest V, a far cry from the 11 you can play today. The Tales series that today boasts 17 titles was about to begin with Tales of Phantasia. It was a golden era for Japanese RPGs, and Capcom wanted to get in on it. Breath of Fire was the result of Capcom's ambitions to get into the RPG space, and with the help of RPG juggernaut Squaresoft, Capcom was able to bring it to the US in late 1994. I've always known this series through word of mouth to be an incredible series worth any gamer's time that unfortunately faded away during the PS2 era and should have never died. So today we're going to break out the Super Nintendo and take a look at Capcom's very first RPG, a game that spawned 4 sequels. Does Breath of Fire deserve to stand among the JRPG greats? Let's find out. Breath of Fire initially seems like a game that's playing it fairly safe in the mechanics. You move about towns, dungeons, and the world map in an overhead view, while the combat is a standard turn-based affair from an isometric perspective that shows off much more detailed sprite work. Combat will have you selecting who to attack and how, and the full turn will play out before you can choose to do something again. Colorful bars represent how close to death you or your enemies are, unless they are a boss. When a boss's health is depleted, you get a foreboding warning and the fight continues for some time. As you start to get moving, you'll find the moment-to-moment mechanics can get a little confusing. Breath of Fire decided not to label anything in the menus with text. As such, everything is represented by icons which can make menu navigation both in and out of battles confusing. Let's take the battle screen. There's a sword icon and AB. I initially believed AB meant to use an ability, like casting a fire spell or cure. No. AB means auto battle, where all your characters will simply do basic attacks relentlessly until you tell them otherwise. While this is an extremely handy mechanic for leveling your characters, it's initially confusing. When you're at an equipment dealer, there's an icon that looks roughly like a barbell. I had absolutely no idea what it meant. It turns out, it's trade in your current gear towards the piece you're interested in. A fantastic way for the era to navigate making sure you always have the best gear, but completely unintuitive to learn. As you progress, you'll move from town to town, entering dungeons along the way and fighting in combat with extreme frequency. I mean, there's a lot of combat. There's even some gear you can wear that increases the encounter rate without actually telling you. Anyhow, you'll keep on wandering and killing until you vanquish the dungeon boss and getting drip-fed a bit of story, or sometimes gaining a new party member. Party members are where Breath of Fire stretches its legs and experiments. Over the course of the game, you'll get 8 party members, and each one has their own abilities that are useful for navigation, combat, money-making, or even finding secrets. If you place that member of your team at the front of the party, you get to use their skill. Bo can walk through forests, Gobi can set up shops and barter your inventory, Mogu can dig holes in the earth, Karn can disarm traps, and Ox can smash through walls. It forces you to think about your party composition beyond the standard, I need a warrior, a mage, a healer, and a tank, and think about when and where to sub in the right person for the right moment. Some characters' abilities are more tied to combat. As the game goes on, Ryu will gain the ability to transform into elemental dragons that are useful in tough boss encounters, where Karn will get the ability to fuse upwards of 4 party members into some sort of super soldier character. However, the fused character's special skills, such as Ox breaking down a wall, cannot be used during that time. While the amount of combat and strategy can get tiresome somewhat quickly, the overall video-audio presentation holds it up so Breath of Fire doesn't quite lose its spark and will keep your curiosity burning for the game's 30-hour or so runtime. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the story. Breath of Fire casts you as Ryu in a fantasy world where magic is normal and anthropomorphized animals are everywhere. There's a text-heavy backstory dump in the prologue, but what it boils down to is that you are a part of the Light Dragon clan, a group that swore off their abilities and powers long ago. However, the Dark Dragon clan is out to take over the world and hunt down the Light Dragons in the process. After the Dark Dragons burn down your peaceful village in the opening and capture your sister, Ryu sets off to find her, regain his dragon powers, and single-handedly topple the Dark Dragon Empire. I wish I could say more about the game's story, however after an initial push to free a few nearby towns from the grips of the Dark Dragons, the path forward and each step gets vague at best. Some of this appears to be a translation issue, as the developers appear to be attempting to deliver the game's story and direction in as few words as possible. However, a lot of it seems to come down to an intentional choice to force you to talk to any and all NPC characters as much as possible to glean any sort of hint as to what the next thing you have to do is. Often the direction will come from a random NPC who will mention something to the effect of, "The town's mayor seems different," leaving you to wander around the game map and figure it out from there. The result is a lot of encouraged exploration where it can feel like Ryu and his motley crew often stumble into saving each and every town from whatever the Dark Dragons are scheming. Here's one such chain of events that occurs about 2/3 of the way through the game. Your party defeats a major boss, and the town rewards you with an item called a sphere that is completely unexplained to you. What it actually does is that it allows your party's fishman to turn into a giant fish on the underwater portion of the world map, which allows the party to cross an underwater canyon and access a new area of the map. The first town you encounter in this new area, everybody speaks in music, making it impossible to communicate with the townspeople and get direction to the next plot point. If you leave town and keep going, you'll encounter another town some distance away where the wind is blowing in such a way that the townspeople have been driven mad. Also, the bridge leading out of town is broken and the repairman is missing. You get a vague hint about wind blowing from the north. North of town, you encounter a secret lab run by a mad scientist. He sends a big monster after you, who it turns out when you defeat it is the repairman you're looking for. However, he now needs medical attention, and you need to get frog oil to cure him. Classic. First, you have to find the frogs, which you essentially just have to stumble across. The frogs imply they're hungry for a giant fly. Back in the Wind Town, you'll find somebody complaining that something took their lunch into a nearby cave. Inside, you'll find a giant fly to murder and bring to the frog. The frog will give you his oil. The repair guy, now feeling better, will imply there's a plant driving the people mad. You saw a weird plant near the lab, so maybe if you go back there you can fix things. You beat up a giant plant and the town is saved. The repair guy goes to fix the bridge. But wait, the mad scientist incapacitates him, so now you have to kill the mad scientist. Now you can cross the bridge and keep wandering into the unknown. But first, the Wind Town has a flute maker who wants to give you a magic flute, but nobody tells you about this, so you have to stumble across it yourself. Once across the bridge, you'll encounter a cave of mole people who have a cursed family member who needs an item from the music town to be cured. They give you a special cowl so you can understand the singing. At last, you can communicate with the music people that you probably forgot I mentioned at the start of this rant. It's just hard to care about the world and the storytelling when the world is this vague. The characters themselves are largely devoid of any personality, and it feels like the main motivator to keep going is, what trope will the game throw at me next? The storytelling itself is inconsistent in its quality. Sometimes the team appears to go all out and show off what the SNES can do in some scenes, and in others it feels like they piece together an important story sequence in less than a day. It may seem like I'm absolutely trashing this game, but it's not a bad game. It's got compelling mechanics, a generally good battle system, and clever use of each and every party member. It's just wrapped up in a package that is so very difficult to care about. It's like having a ribeye steak delivered to you on a 3-week-old moist paper plate. The game was popular at release and spawned a sequel less than a year later, but we can talk about that game some other time. While it was a popular game, Breath of Fire was only ever touched up once. A port was made for the Game Boy Advance in 2001 that redid some of the portrait work, rebalanced the game for easier leveling, fixed up the awful user interface, and added a dash button so you could move faster. Additionally, if you own a Nintendo Switch, the game is available to play as part of the SNES Online package that comes with online play for the system. I'm personally not a fan of the changes made for the Game Boy release, and feel the Switch emulated port is the best way to play the game today. It can be taken on the go, and features the ability to save anytime and rewind gameplay if you want to. This was my first time with Breath of Fire. It remains an interesting game all these years later. There's a clear desire to experiment, and more often than not, the experiments work to help create a better product. Unfortunately, this experimentation came at the expense of coherent and compelling storytelling that makes pushing through to the end a chore that not many can stomach. It's still a fun enough game that I would like to see what a revival effort would do for this series. But unfortunately, the series appears to have stalled out and died with a misguided free-to-play mobile game in 2016. Hopefully, someday, we can see a proper Breath of Fire 6.